they tripled the national record for how long they could go without burning gas. I think just showing people like this is okay, this isn't gonna break things.
Greetings, Earthlings, and welcome back to Earthlings 2.0, the show where we imagine how we can be better versions of ourselves and build a collective future we actually all want to live in. Today's guest is a journalist who just happened to be at the right place at the right time to highlight the country's unique achievement in renewable energy. And that achievement is being hailed as an inspiration for other countries. Our guest was the first to report on Portugal's achievement of powering its grid for 6 consecutive days using 100% renewable energy. And we're going to explore why that's something other countries and states could replicate, even if the geography of their regions doesn't give them an easy supply of geothermal or hydropower. But before we get there, I'm your host, Lisa Ann Pinkerton. I'm the CEO of the award-winning PR firm Technica Communications, which is actually celebrating its 15th anniversary this year. So if you want to be nosy and learn how our company came to be over 15 years, you can go to our website and go through the timeline. It's a little bit of a clean tech 1.0 to 2.0 journey there. I'm also the founder of Women in Clean Tech and Sustainability. And before all this, I was an award-winning environmental science reporter for NPR and PBS. And I want to give all of you a thank you for joining us each week, being our listeners, and geeking out with me on these technology topics and postulating, what the future might hold. All of us here at the Earthlings production team deeply appreciate you for being our listeners. And on that note of appreciation, we would like to get to know you more so that we can appreciate you even better. So we've created this listener survey and we have a Substack newsletter that you can join. So if you scroll down to the show notes, if you would please take that survey, that's going to help us out a lot in terms of ensuring that we are delivering the right content to you and understand who our audience actually is, because I know you're out there. And thank you to Resource Labs for having us on the network. 100% renewable energy. It's a big goal, and many countries, states, provinces, and even whole countries have this goal. And, it varies depending on when they'll reach this goal, 2045, 2050. Some researchers have done the math to say we could achieve it as soon as 2030 if we implemented the right policies and regulations. It's not really a technical challenge. It's more of a people problem. But the concept was first proposed in 1975 in a paper in the journal Science by Danish physicist Brent Sorensen, who's still alive and teaching today, by the way. In 1998, Iceland was the first to propose such a goal. Japan and Australia followed suit in 2003 and 2011. Hawaii and California have also said they want to reach 100% renewables by 2045. So there's a big list here. And every year, that list gets bigger and bigger. In fact, next year, global renewable energy capacity is set to meet 35%. So we're making progress. Already, 12 countries run on around 99% renewables. Those are countries like Ethiopia, Albania, Nepal. But in terms of most gigawatts generated at that 99% mark, those 12 countries include Norway at the top, followed by Iceland and Paraguay. So our guest today says that Portugal's achievement of 6 days of providing 100% of its energy from renewable resources harkens a new future. It's a world where fossil fuel peaker plants are rendered eventually obsolete. And just like those floppy disks and the phone book. Remember those? When was the last time you used a phone book? Of course, some people still have doubts that the renewable energy future is possible. Might be weather, intermittency, grid constraints, but Portugal is an example that shows us that it's possible, even if you're not a country like Costa Rica or Norway or Iceland. So, for today's episode, we went straight to the man who broke the story on Portugal's 100% renewable energy achievement. I even heard his article, which we'll link in the show notes, was one of the most read articles on Canary Media's website last year. His name is Julian Spector. He's a senior reporter at Canary Media, which is an independent nonprofit newsroom covering the transition to clean energy and solutions for the climate crisis. And before launching Canary with his colleagues, he was a reporter at Green Tech Media. His work has also appeared in The Guardian, The Atlantic, Al Jazeera America, and Mother Jones, among others. And he started telling me the story of how his sunny beach vacation turned into the discovery of this story that Portugal was running on 100% renewables.
It was just a total gale of it, just like high winds coming across the Atlantic Ocean, huge waves crashing in. And this is the beach with like the biggest waves in the world. Like surfers come from all over to catch these monster 50-foot, 80-foot waves. And so it's just wind, rain. I was like, that's pretty unfortunate for my beach weekend. But I reached out to folks working in the energy industry there, and it turned out that the exact weather pattern created this record run of renewable energy production for the country, because their fleet is much heavier on wind and hydropower than solar. Solar is like kind of a minor, newer piece of it. And so it turns out if you're running on a lot of wind power and a lot of hydropower, having huge amounts of wind and rain for an extended period of time is like the best thing you could ask for renewables. So once I started looking into it, I realized they'd gone on this run of 6 days producing all the electricity they needed for this country of 10 million people from renewables. And then there's a distinction of some of the time there was still gas being burned and they were just producing a surplus of renewables. But actually for a big chunk of that, there wasn't even any need to burn, gas in the conventional gas power plants. So that was about a 5-day record without the gas and 6-day record of just producing more energy than you needed from the renewable stuff.
And was it something that you think that they expected to have happen because they saw the weather coming, or was it something they noticed after the fact?
I think they couldn't have necessarily known exactly how that would play out, because again, it had never happened for this long a period of time. And I think the previous record for how many days or how many hours they could run without burning gas was just 1/3. So this event they tripled the national record for how long they could go without burning gas. No, I don't think anyone knew specifically how successful this run would be. But that said, it is the culmination of a whole bunch of trends moving very intentionally towards a cleaner energy system. Portugal's been building its renewable fleet for decades at this point. They've been, committing to climate goals and trying to work towards a, much higher level of renewable production and the eventual phase out of gas by 2040. So it's this thing where you're chipping away, you're adding more and more capacity every year. And after a while of buildup, that puts you in this position to really make the most of the ideal weather conditions when they arise.
So if they didn't have the hydropower part, it would have been more difficult to reach that 100% mark.
Yeah. And this gets into the energy storage question, because I think in this particular case, the wind was steady for a very prolonged period of time, but obviously you can't bank on that being around 24/7. But the history of Portugal's grid they've really centered the hydropower in that going back to the 70s. So there's the dictatorship for many decades that ended in the 70s, and then the new kind of democratic state went on this construction campaign and built a bunch of hydropower dams. There's a lot of rivers that cut down from the mountains to the Atlantic Ocean, and you have deep ravines that you could dam. And so they had that as kind of their core, the base of the grid system. And what's great about those is you can store the water, and kind of like before we had lithium batteries, actually just keeping some water up a hill is like the old version of energy storage. And it's still really the biggest like source of grid storage in America and around the world. And just, we don't really talk about it much because it's not high tech and new. Having that built into the system did certainly help kind of, control the flow and be able to like store up all the extra rainwater and parcel it out over a longer period of time.
And how do you think Portugal's feat compares with other countries we've heard over the years, like Costa Rica or Iceland, who have also achieved similar goals? How do you think Portugal's grid setup compares to those, and what lessons can we take from Portugal?
Yeah, well, and this is a really interesting point because, I think a lot of people might hear the idea of like running on 100% clean energy or 100% renewable energy and think that sounds impossible. In fact, many countries literally do that today and have done that for many years. But the trick there is it tends to be highly specific to their like geographical context, I guess. So you have to have like great hydro resources. If you're in Costa Rica and you've got dams of mountain rivers, and you can like run a whole system on that. That's great, but like you can't wish that into existence if it doesn't really exist. Iceland, they get a bunch of geothermal, a bunch of hydropower, and that adds up to like a basically fully clean system. Or you have places that have a bunch of nuclear and can supplement that with some hydropower. But the distinction I would say is like, it's great for them. They've got cleaner air. They've got, low carbon systems already, but that's not a translatable game plan because you can't just like wish that you had that resource. And, it's very hard to build new hydro today. It's very destructive to the river. Most of those facilities were built before we really had kind of modern environmental protections and stuff. So, it's not really a game plan other countries can adapt, and that's what we need. We need like ways for everyone else to get onto the clean energy train. So that's what's special about Portugal is like they started with this solid base of hydro, but they've made this very like intentional step-by-step plan to then add new renewables on top of that and kind of like push past the level of clean energy they were endowed with from previously. And that started like in the 90s with wind, when solar was still pretty expensive. And so they got started with onshore wind. And then more recently, solar's gotten really cheap. So they're sort of now have this like rapidly growing solar sector. And they're looking at things like the floating offshore wind because it's like deep waters there. So yeah, they kind of like started with the thing that was the new clean energy source that was most competitive at the time, and then have been layering on other strategies since then.
It's almost like some of these countries are like trust fund babies and they inherited all of their renewable energy resource, and then you have countries like Portugal who are like building it for themselves, being made a made country in terms of renewables on their own versus something they inherited.
No, it's totally right. And it's like, it's great if you can inherit it, but there's just been this run of wild, like April renewables were providing 95% of all electricity for the country. So like the highest share of new renewable production in 46 years, which is pretty wild. So that also shows it's not just this one weekend last fall. It's been a very clear trend into this year as well.
And what do you think other countries could learn from Portugal? What are some of the lessons that you see being implemented well in that country that could potentially be utilized elsewhere?
Yeah, well, I think there's definitely this element of make a plan early and stick to it. Now it's hard to for other people to get on that bandwagon if they didn't start it, but this goes back to Portugal committing to like a 2050 net zero carbon goal back in 2016. So they were kind of ahead of the EU overall in setting this long-term course towards a serious science-based climate target. And then it's like once you set that big long-term goal, you got to fill in the interim things. So like getting coal off the system, which they did back in 2022. And then just work at ramping up the renewable capacity and try to kind of see how far you can go with as little gas as possible. Essentially, is like they're not trying to get rid of the gas plants when they still need them, but what they've been finding with these moments of renewable surplus is like anytime you don't have to burn gas and you're getting cheap renewables from the sky, that's actually cheaper. So it's kind of like you got to keep the gas plants for now until you have something to replace them as that like on demand, have it whenever you need it resource. But in the meantime, why not save a little money when you can avoid fuel and just sort of like see how far you can go with that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like prioritizing the vegetables in the fresh drawer versus the vegetables in the freezer. Because the ones in the fresh drawer are going to go bad faster, right? So you want to prioritize that
like use
versus
that
the others.
While it's ready. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then you can always pull it out of the freezer when you need it. Okay, I see what you mean.
There's other countries like we've talked about achieving these 100% moments. Also, different states in the United States have achieved that as well. California being the major one. 9 hours of renewables on multiple occasions, which is it's pretty impressive for a state the size of California. How can we expect these trends to continue? What's your prediction?
Yeah, well, and that is really notable. I mean, California being the fifth largest GDP in the world if you stack it up against other countries. So for them to show you can still maintain that level of economic vitality and, bring in variable renewables and all the kind of ups and downs that entails is significant. I think there's always this push and pull when you get these kind of dramatic numbers and these exciting bursts of clean air, because it's like, 9 hours that's great. That's also not a full day. It's like it's very much a partial success on the way towards a longer term, more difficult goal. But I think my mental framework for this is like, people say, oh, we can't run a system on solar. It's only in the sunlight. But like, no one's saying you run the whole thing on solar. What we're saying is there's a portfolio of options with you're drawing it from a whole range of different power plants, different sources. And so it makes sense to try to get the like lowest cost mix of things that, reduces harm to people's lungs and hearts and to the environment and to the climate. But you can imagine like if we're starting where you only have very limited periods that you're capable of running all on the renewables, the next step is to lengthen that period. And, Portugal started small, then they've gotten to like a week. If California's at 9 hours, we're probably going to need more wind in order to get through the night. But you can imagine, let's get to 10 hours. Let's get to a full day. And then from a full day, a week. And then maybe that clusters in the shoulder months where it's, not a crazy air conditioning need. And, like the shoulder months are nice because it's like sunny, but it's lower demand. So it's not as tough to like supply that. But, if we could have our shoulder months be pretty fully decarbonized in a few years, that's great. And then you build off of that and get into the seasonal variations, which are harder. But, it's kind of like you got to make steady progress towards the big goal. And I think we talk a lot about 100% and then how impossible that seems. But it's like, we don't really need to solve that right now. But the more hours and the more days we can get with the cheaper, cleaner stuff, just everyone benefits. And then you're pushing towards this kind of end goal that seems really distant and kind of otherworldly right now.
Yeah, I mean, you just figure it out, right? It's technology and software, and the more we implement that stuff, the better it gets, and the more confident I think utility operate and grid operators feel about integrating more renewables, right? Because their ultimate mission is to keep the lights on, right? Make sure that there's no interruptions and whatever, and that's their primary focus.
And that's really important. Like it's crucial to keep the lights on. You don't want to jump in too quickly with new technologies and stuff. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I think people are still scarred from the energy challenges of the early 2000s when all those blackouts and brownouts were happening, which ended up being manufactured. It wasn't. Go look up your Enron scandals for that one. Market manipulation,
market problem, not a technological one. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I guess this is where storage comes into play, and we haven't talked that much about that, but I know you cover storage a lot. What's your prediction in terms of how we'll start to see storage playing a greater role to help us get longer periods of time where it's 100% renewables or pretty close?
Yeah, the storage is crucial. Interestingly, Portugal doesn't have any like large standalone batteries. And they're starting to get a little battery storage paired with wind and paired with solar, but not a huge piece of their kind of operations right now. But that's because they have the strong hydro base.
And they've got the wind that can carry them at night, right? Solar during the day, wind at night, and they've got that good wind resource as well.
Totally. So it's really it's a portfolio approach. And actually, if you have really large amounts of complementary renewables, the need for like batteries per se goes down. But if you look at California, where it's almost all a solar game, or Hawaii, the batteries are crucial because, yeah, there isn't that wind to come in at night and balance out the loss of the solar. Everyone I talk to says, like, as time goes on, the batteries are getting bigger and bigger in terms of their duration and how many hours of consistent power they can deliver. So it's kind of like you start small with the batteries, and then the more solar there is, the more need there is to like take it in bulk and move it to other times of day. And yeah, so Texas is great. It's a example of what happens when you get kind of like bureaucratic roadblocks out of the way. Although the legislature is potentially going to add new bureaucratic roadblocks, but at the moment it's like, take out the kind of legacy monopoly utility that wants to just like lock in the status quo and just say, hey, if you want to build your own battery and put your own money, do it and see how you go. And people have been making a lot of money on that. So it's expanding tremendously.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in some regions, these utilities really do have a monopoly on the energy, as we set it up for them to provide this reliable power when these big plants needed to be built. Great solution for an old problem. Now we have a new problem, so we need a new solution. That old solution isn't going to work as well. So lots of politics and things are coming into play with entrenched interests and new entrants. So I know you're a journalist, so sometimes journalists don't like to make predictions, but at the risk of asking you to make a prediction, what do you see coming in the next 5 years, like based on your reporting and what you know about the space, because you know so much, such deep knowledge. What do you think is like we could realistically see in the next 5 years?
It's a lot of solars getting built. I think it's like the most new power plant capacity since like 20 years ago. And like 60% of that's solar now. So it's just like it's just happening everywhere at scales that are beyond anything we've seen before. And obviously, this is not limited to the states with the strong climate goals. This is like across the board, and it's just really cheap. And so we're going to see a lot more of that. I think this load growth thing that's been getting on everyone's mind lately is kind of this wild card.
What does load growth mean for those who aren't familiar?
Yeah, yeah. So that's the like utility term for just increasing demand. So they call load is like the thing using the electricity. And for the last 20 years or so, it's been really flat because like our tools get more efficient, the LED light bulbs and stuff. So we've been like having
But now we have EVs.
Now we have EVs,
crypto and AI and all these other things.
Totally. And an onshoring of like manufacturing in a way we haven't seen in generations too. So it's like huge new factories showing up, ton of new AI computing, which is very energy intensive. And so now all these people whose job it is to like look ahead and make sure we're building enough power plants to supply the needs are seeing these, it's like from last year to this year, wildly more demand predicted in the near term outlook, which gets people very scared in that world because you're like, like we haven't had to build new power capacity this quickly since decades ago. But so there's a risk there that certain utilities are going to try to like go for the thing they like and trust the most, which is new fossil gas. And there's a world where you use that kind of emergency of like, we need this so soon to just like ram through a bunch of gas plants that'll then be around for another 40 years or so. I've talked to people who are also looking historically and said we've had periods in American history where load was growing faster than it is now, and we managed to handle that. If it's approached in a certain way, you could imagine this being a boon for renewables because you can build them quickly if you have the access to the grid and interconnection, and you could see sort of
when the resource is free.
Yeah. So I think that's a big kind of wild card, but yeah, I think we'd start seeing, you asked about the next 5 years, just sort of like a more nationwide trend of like get as much solar production in the day as you can and kind of like adjust the rest of the system around that. It should push down costs again because of the fundamental cheapness of that resource. It starts kind of, I think that part's in a fairly unstoppable trajectory now, just from the fundamentals. And then that starts having knock-on effects that force other changes, like adding in storage or, maybe hopefully policies that like make it really attractive to charge electric cars during the sunny hours and, create a system that like soaks up as much of that as you can. Things like that. Trying to think if there's any limbs I could go out on here. It'll be cleaner. I think just showing people like this is okay, this isn't gonna break things. And that it's useful like across the country. It's not limited to California or one place or another. It's kind of everywhere now. Helps you be resistant to spikes in the fuel markets and the, oil and gas and all that. And it's American energy also. So it's kind of like a component of this moment of real American energy prosperity that's happening right now, where we are drilling more oil than ever before. We're drilling more gas. We're also building more renewables and American clean energy. For climate change, we got to figure some things out on that oil and gas side. But in the near term, it's like, yeah, why not produce as much of our own energy as we possibly can, and use that to kind of like strengthen the domestic economy.
Earthlings. What we didn't get to in our interview with Julian is that Portugal has a goal of reaching 85% of its electricity from renewable sources by 2030, which is only 6 years away. And it is well on the path to doing that. In fact, renewable energy supplied 89% of Portugal's electricity requirements for the first 3 months of this year. Hydropower still carried the day there, or days, if we want to be specific, contributed almost half of Portugal's energy mix. Also, the use of gas fired turbines was also down by almost half compared to the year before, making it its lowest level of gas consumption since 2014. So, like us and many others, we are watching Portugal, and I would expect other countries to start achieving their own 100% renewable achievements, even if it's only for a few hours or a day in the coming months and years. So, keep your sensors pointed at this story for the latest developments. In honor of World Migratory Bird Day, which happened on May 11th this year, our faith in humanity is restored by the efforts of Connie Sanchez. She is the Bird Friendly Buildings Program Manager for the National Audubon Society in the US. And for the past 2 decades, she has been asking cities and their building managers to dim the lights in the spring and fall to prevent massive bird deaths. Called the Lights Out Initiative here in the United States. And globally, it has the name the BirdLife Global Flyways Program. No matter where you're living, the whole point is that at night, birds migrate through the stars. And when there's artificial light, it just screws everything up for them. Even just one building can cause a major problem for birds. One year, in 1 week, nearly 400 birds were caught in the floodlights of a 32-story Texas skyscraper and killed via window collisions. I used to work at a big skyscraper, and the thunk of birds hitting the windows was constant. Connie and her Audubon Society colleagues currently work with 52 cities in the US and 100 states to turn off non-essential lighting during migration season. And in Chicago, that can be like hundreds of buildings coordinated for this effort. Globally, like I said, BirdLife International has a partnership with 117 organizations, and the BirdLife Global Flyway Program is the international effort. So cities around the world and countries like Canada, Ireland, UK, Russia are all coordinating to dim their lights for our feathered friends. In addition, there's a new international guideline being worked on to focus on migratory land birds under the Convention on Migratory Species with the UN. So look that up if you're interested in learning more. We commend Connie and all her colleagues globally who inspire us to do more for our flying friends. Like we can put water out or build artificial nests. We can plant insect-friendly gardens. There's a lot of stuff that we can do as individuals. And these are just some of the things that we can do to ensure humans and animals live together on this beautiful blue-green space flower that we call home.